is Tom Knight, and joining me today is my good friend Jack Hunter. Jack and I are from about the same time period, and we're going to talk today about free speech and how things have changed over the years. Uh, Jack, thanks for joining me, man.
It's great to be here. It's great to be with you, Tom.
So you've talked about this a bit on like social media, and I think you've written about it a bit. When we were coming up, because we're the same generation, I
Hmm.
think we're like a year apart in age.
Sure.
When we came up, it wasn't it wasn't Republicans that were defending free speech back then. Now was it?
No, it wasn't the classic American concept of free speech. Obviously, we have a First Amendment, which makes America unique. But in a cultural or political context, it was groups like the ACLU. And I was an '80s kid, and as I was a child and became a young adult, and to the degree that you start thinking about things like free speech or things like that, I understood that speech is so free in the United States that a group like the ACLU defended Nazis in
Mhm.
1978, Skokie, Illinois. Now that is not an
Right.
affirmation of what Nazis believe. That is a statement that in the United States, speech is so free, even that kind of detestable and wrong speech is protected. That was the understanding. The people who wanted to censor when I was a kid, and look, when I was a kid, I had Kiss records and Wasp and Quiet Riot and Def Leppard and Judas Priest and then Slayer. I
Oh
was
yeah.
in all that stuff, middle school and high school, Sex Pistols, Ramones stuff. It was Christian conservatives, the religious right, Republican voters who wanted to censor all that stuff, put stickers on it, PMRC. I remember when I was a kid, KISS either stood for Knights in Satan Service or Kids in Satan Service. WASP, I was told by
Yes.
fundamentalist friends at school, stood for We Are Satan's People or We Are Sexual Perverts. Therefore, we must ban this stuff to keep young minds like my own from being corrupted and whatnot. And that sounds kind of cartoonish in 2023, but that was the concept of who
That
wanted
was
to.
the argument.
Yeah, that was the argument. That was the concept or context of who wanted to censor. It was the right wing and who wanted to
Mhm.
protect free speech and the arts and things like that. And it was the left. You remember Robert Mapplethorpe in the early 90s with the Piss Christ
Yes.
that was federally funded. Now, I might question that aspect
Yep.
of it, but it was the left that said this is offensive as hell. And guess what? It is protected by the First Amendment. And they were absolutely correct about that. That's not at all where we
Absolutely.
are today at all. It's flipped.
Oh no. Ironically, they would still support Piss Christ,
Yeah, because it's anti-Christian, but
but it's they
uh,
just want it. They just want to censor different kinds of offense. That's really where the disconnect is. It's the stuff that they tolerated back then. They still tolerate, but now there's all this other stuff that they find offensive. Now suddenly it's okay to try to ban stuff.
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I have more progressive friends when I'm at home in Charleston, South Carolina, because I'm a musician and was always in bands. And to the degree that anybody's thinking about politics and not girls and drugs and partying in that environment or whatever,
Yeah.
it's leans left. They generally tend to be left leaning. But I have a friend that I've been
Right.
a guy I've known for 25 years, and we were talking about he's very progressive today. I would not say he's woke because he's of a certain age. You find that the younger you go, but he's definitely left wing. But when we were
Mhm.
kids, to be a liberal, so to speak, um, you were sort of a prude if, like, you didn't have uh, free and open sex and sex with multiple partners and all that. And like that was part of being a liberal. Oh, don't be such a prude. We're libertine. We don't care. You know, that kind of thing. And conservatives aren't like that today, but now it's like I have to get a contract at this campus to have sex with a. It's like they're the
Yeah.
fundamental. It's weird, but
It's
that was
it,
when I
it
was
really
18
is.
or 20. That was my not my conception of what a liberal was. It was very much the opposite. That if you had any
Right.
sort of
I mean,
traditional mores or norms about that kind of stuff, that you were ultra conservative.
yeah. And meanwhile, like I remember that time too. That was actually I started out as a liberal in my political life, and I'm not going to lie, that may have played a factor. You know, the idea of
Oh,
free
totally. Yeah.
love, baby. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
absolutely.
Obviously, I needed
Yeah.
all the help I could get with this face. Um, so I was very much part of that. Loved that aspect of it, and now it's like you almost need a shout. It's like the liberals have taken it to the Victorian era
Yes.
where you got to have a chaperone for everything. You almost need third parties negotiating on your behalf for sexual conquest. It's the Victorians
Weird.
would approve of a lot of what the progressives are doing right now,
Yeah, it's
all
like an
while
updated
they're
version.
decrying that era.
No, that's absolutely right. And in the broader sense, we're talking about free speech and how things have flipped around. Um, People are losing faith in institutions. Joe Rogan is more popular than CNN. More people care about
Mhm.
what individuals like Tim Pool have to say than even if you're a Fox viewer, you might have liked Tucker Carlson when he was there, but you might not trust Fox at large, if you catch my drift.
Yeah,
People don't trust these institutions, legacy media, whatever you want to call it. They might look at the Washington Post or the New York Times, but there's not this investment or real trust. They're just like, all right, what are they talking about? Now let me go listen to Joe Rogan or read Base Politics and see what's actually happening or what's going on, or somebody that's not trying to BS us. That's kind of where
yeah,
we're at. So I think this rise in censorship, whether it's censors at big tech who think, well, this is misinformation, that's information, or people in the government who reach out to these social media platforms and say, don't say this, do say that, da, 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 da. What I think that is they're used to being able to control the narrative, sort of the popular culture, establishment media, the federal government. We
yeah,
decide what is true and what is not true, what is true information and what is misinformation. And they're losing that control. People don't trust them anymore. They don't have that power. Even Hollywood and entertainment, they were part of that, controlling aspect, and they don't have that anymore. I was remarkably shocked by how not woke the Barbie movie is, despite some conservative critics who think it is. It's not that, but that's sort of a reflection of them being like, you know, Bud Light kind of screwed up. We put all this woke crap in movies. Maybe we need to worry about the bottom line more. Top Gun was the same way. There was no woke stuff in that. But
oh
back
yeah,
to censorship in the media, I think those power structures, whether it's Hollywood and entertainment, the government, social media, they're struggling to control the narrative. They want to control what's right, what's wrong, what you should believe, what you shouldn't believe, who should vote for, who you shouldn't vote for, and they can't do it anymore. And this heavy censorship regime, whether by private actors or government actors, is a reflection of their frustration.
yeah, and it really is troubling, this whole misinformation thing, that we have to quell misinformation, because the way we used to do that was with more speech.
Yes. That's what the
With
ACLU would have said in the 80s when I was a kid. That's exactly what they would have said, and
well,
don't really say that anymore.
and it's fact checking started in part as a way to do that. Everybody had their fact checkers who would publish their fact checking, and it was, yeah, what they're saying is nonsense. Here's why it's nonsense, and people would refer to that. Now
Right.
it's, oh yeah, I don't like what you're saying, so we're going to censor this. And in a lot of the cases, what we saw with the Twitter files and with the Facebook files is the stuff they were working to censor was stuff that turned out to be true.
Right. And Mark,
A
Mark,
lot of the
Zucker,
COVID stuff,
Mark
a
Zuckerberg,
lot of the
who's
COVID. Oh, go ahead.
I was just say the head of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, even said exactly or close to what you just said, that he was talking about the FBI coming to them and saying this is misinformation, that's misinformation, and we got to do something about it. He said it was remarkably hard in general, but remarkably hard, especially when some of this stuff was debatable or even true. I mean, that's basically what he said. And
Yeah.
look, this is what the disinformation industry or the fact checking industry really is, if you want to break it down. If the establishment narrative says A, whether A is true or not, that's true information. If the
Mhm.
establishment narrative says B is misinformation and it happens to be true, doesn't matter if it's true, it's misinformation. That's how that works. We saw this with the
Right.
Hunter Biden thing, Russian
Yeah.
disinformation. Look, I'll give you an example. The Democratic side, look, there's plenty of Republicans who want to ban books and do stupid censorship things all over the country.
Yeah.
But as far as who controls the institutions, the Democratic Party right now at large thinks that Russia and Donald Trump colluded in 2016. Is that true? Well, according to a 2-year investigation by Robert Mueller, it is not true. He couldn't find any
No.
evidence of this. So
And he looked.
objectively, forget about your opinion, Tom, my opinion, the average Democrat, the average Republican, that is not true. You will see
Mhm.
Democratic politicians as high up as Hillary Clinton to this day, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Kinzinger all day long, claim that that is a true statement, and they don't get fact checked because it is a true statement to people who think like them, even though it is objectively false. If you catch what I'm
Yep.
saying, they're not going to get flagged for saying that. If I say, if to this day, I won't put on Facebook anything about COVID. I'll talk about other things because I would like to make
Yeah.
a buck or two and be monetized. That would be nice. But if I say if you get the vaccine, you can still get COVID, even what 4 years later after we've learned that's
Mhm.
absolutely true, I could get flagged for that. That could be labeled misinformation, even though it's true. So
Yeah.
information that's what is misinformation has zero to do with whether it's true or not, and absolutely 100% to do with whether the establishment thinks it's something you should believe.
And it's funny to me because a great example of how this could have been used in the past is Watergate.
Oh yeah,
Because, you know, initially the media did not agree with what Woodward and Bernstein were reporting. The
right.
Nixon administration basically called it misinformation.
That's
They
right.
weren't throwing around the term at the time, but they said it was false. And by today's standards, all of that reporting would have been taken off of Twitter. Just like the New York Post, I mean, they had their account locked on Twitter over the Hunter Biden story that
Yeah.
turned out to be true.
Right.
You know, it was purged from Facebook. And let's be perfectly honest, most people don't get a newspaper delivered. They go on social media and see what's trending. They
No,
see what shows up in their feed.
that's exactly right. And look, ideally or theoretically or whatever you want to put it, the job of a journalist is to hold people in power's feet to the fire, to ask
Mhm.
questions, to challenge the government, to debate the powerful. The job of the
Yep.
mainstream media today is to protect and preserve and promote establishment narratives. That is, they see that as their job. They see
Yeah.
challenges to that as that's right wing and that's bad. You know,
Yeah.
I never voted for Donald Trump. I'm not a big Trumpy guy or whatever, but when he said that the press is the enemy of the people, many in the press understandably took that as he's saying that having a press and challenging him is bad. I took it as whatever you think about Donald Trump, these jerks who call themselves journalists see their job as promoting the Democratic Party's narrative. Glenn Greenwald
Yeah.
tweets and talks about this all the time as a man of the left, and he is
Mhm.
absolutely correct. When they see people putting down information that is true and are labeling it misinformation, the press, who do this themselves, that's who usually does it, see that as a good, a positive good for society. And if something's done by the government, where are all the journalists right now hunting down Joe Biden and asking about the disaster in Maui? Because I
Yeah.
remember when Katrina happened a little less than 20 years ago, the Hurricane Katrina, the disaster in
Mhm.
Louisiana, and George W. Bush was raked over the coals for not having a good enough or fast enough response. And I think that was fair treatment of the American president during a national tragedy. Where is the media
Yeah.
doing that to Joe Biden right now? They won't do that because that's not their job. Their job is to protect and promote the head of the Democratic Party, who is Joe Biden.
Exactly. And it is sad that that's the case. Because it's like, let's remember, you and I are both old enough to remember 9/11.
Right.
George W. Bush continued reading the story to the kids after being told what happened so as to not freak out the kids.
Right.
Or at least that was the official excuse, and it's plausible. Um, and he was raked over the coals for not immediately dropping the book and responding.
Right. And
Now,
that's fair. Yeah.
right, it's I get both sides of the argument.
Sure.
It's you make the decision in the heat of the moment. I get where that decision came from. I get where the criticism comes from. All points are fair in that case to me. It's you're damned
Sure.
if you do, damned if you don't. He couldn't have made a right decision. Um, but you know, like earlier today, it was reported that Biden was asked about Hawaii, and his response was no comment.
Right. And I'm not laughing at the tragedy. I'm laughing at the absurdity of an American president
Right.
saying that. And to the only people I see tweeting about it or talking about it are mostly on the conservative side. So they just dismiss this
Right.
major story of American president who just sent $200 million more to Ukraine for God knows what. To what end? Not even having a comment about a big tragedy in his own country.
And you know, it didn't have to say anything. He could have just said, "Look, this is an awful tragedy. We're doing what we
Right.
can. We're evaluating other options. The people of Hawaii are going to be taken care of. Don't worry about it."
Yeah.
Okay,
That
fair
would be a
enough.
presidential normal thing to
You
do.
know,
But yeah, whatever.
yeah, but no, no comment.
Right.
It's bizarre to me. Um, a while back, you actually talked about um, where Elon Musk takes over Twitter,
Right.
and CNN decided that free speech was a right wing issue now.
Yeah.
That made that because Elon Musk was taking a free speech stance. Twitter was a conservative website, a right wing website,
Yes. Yes.
and
So
it's hilarious to me.
yeah, because right, free protecting free speech in the United States historically has been something that the left have been more concerned with than the right. The 1984 movie Cobra, starring Sylvester Stallone. The whole
Oh
concept of that
yes.
movie is a conservative Reagan era law and order cop who will bend the rules to carry out real justice despite the rules as they stand and constitutionality and all that.
Mhm.
There's a scene in that movie at the beginning where there's a dead victim, and a press reporter from the 80s, back when you had a press that kind of thought journalism should care about rules and questioning people, walks up to Sylvester
Right.
Stallone like, what about this, the bad guy who he shot? What about his due process rights? Which is a legitimate question. And Sylvester Stallone
Mhm.
rips back the blanket over the victims, like, "You tell his family about his due process rights, right?" So that was the
Yeah.
right wing, screw due process, screw that. We're just tough and all that kind of stuff. Now Elon Musk buys Twitter and says, I'm a free speech absolutist. I'm going to have free speech. I'm going to allow free speech as a private actor. Now, he hasn't lived up to that. We can
Mhm.
get to that later. But he says that,
Right.
and he's considered right wing by the left, the establishment media. Sorry, I'm being redundant there. He's
Fair.
considered right wing because he's going to allow multiple views, multiple opinions. The establishment view is there's true information, which is our narrative, the Democratic Party's narrative, and there's
Mhm.
misinformation that is not our narrative. And we've already gone over it. It doesn't matter what's true and what's not. It's their narrative is true and true information. So in their view, Elon Musk is going to allow an avalanche of misinformation, and that means right wing. Being
Mhm.
a liberal means, Tom, I am a liberal. I'm a liberal in the classical sense. I have a point of
Same.
view and you have a point of view. And as a liberal, I don't have to agree with you, but I believe that you have a right to your point of view and I have a right to my point of view, and we're going to exist in the same space. The
Yep.
average Democratic, certainly progressive activists, but even a lot of Democratic voters and certainly the media today think, I have a point of view, it's the correct point of view, and you don't deserve a point of view because you're so horribly wrong. So when it comes to Elon, that's what they really think. That's where they're at, and they're that illiberal, and they can't even see it because they can't get out of their own way. And the right wingers are the same way in different ways. But Elon Musk, the argument with him is he is right wing. What he's doing is right wing because he's going to dare to allow diverse opinion. So my criticism of Elon Musk is he's promised free speech, but he hasn't lived up to it enough. Their criticism of Elon Musk is how dare he allow free speech. That's where we are. That's the
Yeah.
debate. Those are two very different debates. So,
Very much so. And it's not like there's not a way to there's community notes. There's a method for fact checking
right.
misinformation, and it works.
Yeah, and then it's great and it's democratic. It's way more democratic than
Yeah.
the old Twitter regime where just a couple of, college age
A-
lunkheads who were woke decided what's true information and not information, which is
And
how it is
and
across the
they
board.
hate it because they get fact checked.
Yeah, that's great.
When Joe Biden talks about we've lowered inflation, you get a community note going, no, the rate of inflation has slowed, but inflation is still, increasing overall.
Right. And he's
And
yeah.
they hate that. They want that, like you said, they control the narrative. What fits their narrative is true, pointing out that no, inflation isn't actually dropping. It's the rate of inflation's increase that's dropping.
That's
And,
right.
everyone's still paying for all that inflation we had over the last 2 years on top of the new inflation. They don't like that because people look at that and go, that's why my grocery bill's so damn high.
They don't want true information getting out. They think democratically fact checking, regular people fact checking somebody that way is a threat to democracy. I know that sounds stupid, but they honestly think that. They think democratic
Yeah,
behavior, regular people having a say and doing things and having any kind of power whatsoever, is a threat to their power because they're the elite. And to them, democracy is their control. Actual democracy scares
yeah.
the hell out of them and pisses them off.
Well, yeah, that's why they talk democracy. They talk about being supporter of democracy. But when you really look at it, what they want is a technocratic regulation
Yeah,
scheme. And, really in this regard, what the community notes does is democratizes what they want being, experts making the call.
correct.
But
Yeah,
our
that
response to COVID was crafted by experts, and look at how badly that went.
Yeah, and let's even look at our elections. People point to Trump and populism. Trump is the product of people being frustrated about these kind of things for a long time. He's the one that became president.
Mm,
I would argue if you go back to 2004 and the Howard Dean phenomenon, he was sort of a populist candidate for a while, coming from the left, the
mm.
Democratic Party. He had that silly scream. It kind of killed
Yeah.
his run there. But even as establishment as he was, head of the DNC and all that, a lot of people, independents, flocked to him thinking he was something different, right? Populist, and
Uh-huh.
he wasn't supposed to be the candidate. It was supposed to be John Kerry, and it'd be John Kerry. Fast forward 4 years later, Ron Paul on the Republican side was sort of that
Yeah.
populist impulse. He was the candidate the party did not want, the establishment did not want. He got a lot of Democratic support. He got a lot of independent support. He got a lot of Republicans, especially younger ones, who thought about things a little
Mhm.
bit different. I mean, that was the tail end of the Bush Cheney era, and Ron Paul was the exact opposite of that. You saw that repeated in 2012 with Ron Paul, his movement getting even bigger, sort of this populist upsurge, and that coincided with the Tea Party movement on the right, which was lots of
Yep.
people just like, we don't like the establishment of the Republican Party, we certainly don't like the Democratic Party, we don't like the establishment media who run cover for these people. They were sensing that something
Mhm.
was wrong, that they didn't trust institutions. In 2012, you also got the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, which was populism on the left. And a lot of people saying,
Yep.
we don't like the mainstream Democratic Party. We don't like the Republicans either, but we like this guy. They saw integrity. They saw authenticity. They saw that with Bernie on the left in 2016, who was challenged by
Mhm.
Hillary Clinton. And if you wanted the real populist candidate on the left, you were for Bernie and against Hillary, who was the establishment. And on the right, the version of that was Donald Trump, who was bigger than any of these populist versions. Well, we
Yep.
had 2020 and Trump lost, but that impulse is still there. You see it. You see it on the left with RFK Jr. You see it on the right,
Yep.
certainly with Trump still, and people like Vivek Ramaswamy, and some
Yep.
others. It's not gone away, and people are flocking to candidates like that, and they are flocking to media like that. I think base politics is part of that. I've mentioned Joe Rogan a few times. People like that
Yep.
because they want authenticity. They want the truth. They want to circumvent the narratives that are being pushed by the mainstream political parties and the mainstream political establishment. So that impulse is clear for me to see. People will nitpick at, things wrong with Trump, things wrong with Bernie, things wrong with Ron Paul, but it's all one big part in a broad sense of this impulse to get away from being told what to do by an establishment that has no credibility whatsoever anymore, especially post COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, you mentioned base politics, where you and I both contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a story that dropped today. We're recording this on Monday, because you were at the Young Americans for Liberty
Yeah,
conference this
I
past.
was at the 14th annual conference over the weekend. It was fantastic.
And so you said you've been there every year. You said,
I spoke the
right?
first year in 2009. It was lawyer Bruce Fine, myself, and Ron Paul. We were the three speakers. There was about 40 kids. Now there's 1,100. So
Oh wow! So you've seen it grow. But
yeah, and that's
one of
that's
the things we,
invite only. There were a lot more that wanted to come. That's the ones that made the cut.
oh wow, you had the opportunity. One of the other speakers this year
Hmm.
was Justin Amash, former Libertarian representative. And he had some really interesting thoughts on free speech. Why don't you walk my audience through that who haven't clicked the link yet?
Sure, sure. And I welcome anybody to go to Base Politics, and they can find the story about Justin Damash's defense of free speech. The thing that I
And I'll
highlighted that
have I'll have the link in the description.
Sure. He talked about some basic things, like the First Amendment protects free speech. If you're a private entity, the First Amendment doesn't apply. Twitter and Facebook, as much as we hate it, can do whatever they like because they are private, social media platforms, private companies. But when the federal government goes and tells them what to do, no, that's a direct violation of the First Amendment. He made that point. He talked about Section 230 and how that protects free speech for the internet. If we didn't have Section 230 and I tweeted, Tom Knighton's hat looks funny, and you wanted to sue me, you could actually sue Twitter. So Twitter's not going to allow anything if you don't have Section 230. But the most interesting thing
Right.
that I thought Amash said is we need to protect deplorable speech, wrong speech, bad speech, wrong
Yeah.
ideas. That's part of the First Amendment. It will go once again, the ACLU protecting Nazi speech in 1978. And the point he made is not only should we do that because that's what the First Amendment was intended to do, and that's the kind of free speech we have in America, but because often wrong speech, wrong ideas, bad ideas over time turn out to be true. So it was
Yeah.
censored that Hunter Biden had dealings, as seen through the emails on an obtained laptop by the New York Post, had dealings overseas that were questionable ethically, morally, and that might also involve his former vice president father and future president father. Something that is certainly
Yeah.
newsworthy, but certainly before a presidential election when Twitter, through
Absolutely.
government directives, we've learned, put the kibosh on it. They said it was Russian disinformation. They lied. It was not Russian disinformation. It was legit. It's legit now. There are no investigations that I know about, or there is one, but we'll see where it goes. The point is, Justin Amash said that wrong ideas sometimes over time can turn out to be true. The entire establishment told us that was a wrong idea. I remember trying to retweet that New York Post article, and it wouldn't let me do it.
Same.
Um, it turned out to be true. It was once considered a wrong idea or a bad idea to say herd immunity exists with COVID. It was a wrong idea to say if you get the vaccine, you could get it again. That would have been censored. That's a wrong idea. CDC says so. Anthony Fauci says so. You can't defy him. You can't defy the federal government.
Maverick theory.
Right. And it turned out to be true. So what Amash was saying was poignant, and I wrote that article, and I hope everybody reads it and takes that point because a lot of right wingers don't care about this free speech stuff. I know they do a little bit more because they feel like they're being targeted, and they are. People on the left
Mhm.
do not give a damn, and they come down on the side of, in their mind, they will tell you, I support free speech. And then if you ask them, well, do you support allowing misinformation? They'll say, oh, no, we got to get rid of that. And I say, misinformation according to who? And
Yeah.
they might not have a straight answer, but the answer is the federal government, the authorities, and the people they like, which means they're not
Right.
liberals, don't believe in free speech. But yeah, Amash's point stands. All speech needs to be protected, even the worst.
Yeah. And that's what always been my issue with the whole misinformation. We can't allow that thing is who determines what's misinformation? Well, that's going to be the government, which is going to be whoever
Right.
is actually in power at that moment. And if you can't see where that could go,
And they
you
can't. I don't want the
lack the
Trump.
imagination.
I don't want the Trump administration in charge of speech because that's
Oh
that's
God,
the
no.
that's the position they're taking. They're like what Biden officials say and whatever they're doing on Facebook and Twitter. We think it's great, and how dare Mike Taibbi or Glenn Greenwald or Michael Schellenberger Twitter criticize any of this? In fact, they are right wing for criticizing this. But the logical
Yeah.
end of their argument in saying that the federal government should have that kind of power, and they won't outright say it, they just defend it or get mad at you for pointing it out. But the logical end is a President Ron DeSantis or President Donald Trump or whoever might come from the Republican side next would have that same power according to the same logic. I don't want them to have that power. That's
Oh no.
scary.
I never. I never want the way I look at legislation is: do I want my worst enemy to have that authority?
No.
If the answer is I don't care, okay, we can talk about it. If it's oh hell no, then obviously that's a no go because it almost seems a lot of times like progressives are convinced that they're when they win an election, they're hearkening in 1,000 years of progressive rule,
Yes.
and they never think about the fact that they have 4 to 8 years.
That's right.
The pendulum swings on that regard. They have 4 to 8 years,
Right. And
and then the other side gets a vote. They step in, and you've given them all this power.
right. Yeah.
And
And the nationalist conservatives on the right, see the left doing this and they're like, well, we should just do it too. They're going to do it anyway, so we should do it too. I totally disagree with that.
yeah, I agree.
besides that not being the historical conservative tradition in the United States, if the Constitution, the founders, and Barry Goldwater has anything to say about that, it's not freedom. I don't consider owning the libs or controlling them to be a victory. I consider that we've all lost at that point. I don't want them controlling. I don't want to control them, and I don't want them controlling me. Even though those nationalist conservatives are correct, they want to control me and are trying. But that shouldn't be the standard that we're seeking
Yeah.
as
Robert
libertarians or right leaning people or whatever.
Robert Heinlein once wrote something, and I don't have the whole quote, but it's basically boiled down to no matter what labels we put on politics, it really boils down to there's two camps: those who don't want to be controlled, and those who want to control everybody.
Right.
And we're seeing a lot of people decide that the way to own the libs is by basically becoming the libs.
Yeah. No, that's
And that's terrifying.
No, that's I think the national conservatives are seeing their high point, to be honest with you, and the representatives in Congress like Josh Hawley, J.D. Vance to a degree. I'm not saying they're going away, but a lot of them put all those eggs in Ron DeSantis's basket, and that basket ain't doing too great right now. So we'll see how that turns out.
Not based on the
Yeah, but on the principle of it, just the idea that we should emulate the authoritarian left by becoming a more authoritarian right and using all those tactics is something I dismiss out of hand. And look, they'd be like, "Oh, libertarian idealist, blah, you're a wimp or whatever." Yeah, sure, dude. Go ahead and say that. We'll see what happens in real life when you try those ideas.
Here's the thing: they like to call us wimps, but we're not the ones who's swinging the breeze based on popular opinion.
Right. That's exactly.
We've never been the popular opinion.
I am a full endorser of populism. I think we don't get anything done without populism. I believe in libertarian populism. I think Ron Paul was a libertarian populist. So I'm not the guy sitting here like, oh, populism's the problem. It's not. It's the only way regular people are going to be able to rise up and get anything done. I don't care if it's the Tea Party movement, which was populist, Bernie Sanders movement, which I totally disagree with in principle, but it was populist. That you have to be a grassroots challenging the establishment. That's populism. It's not about policy, it's about tactics. So the only way we're going to get what things done is that way, but it's not being authoritarians. It's asking to reclaim our liberties as they're trying to take them. Not asking.
Absolutely. Yeah, because we're gonna have to. They're not gonna go, oh, okay, sure, we'll play nice.
Sure. Well,
no,
like
we're gonna have to
look at Rumble. Glenn Greenwald, whose show I watch most nights at 7 p.m. I highly recommend it. System update. He starts off the show, welcome to Rumble, to the free speech alternative to YouTube. Now, and it is. It's like you can pretty much do what you want. Will it remain as such? I don't know, but that's an example of that's a corporation, but it's populism in a sense. It's challenging the establishment, the system as it is.
I am not sure. There you are. Okay.
I think we're back.
Okay, yeah, I think we're back. You were saying Glenn Greenwald starts the show?
I was just saying he's on Rumble. He puts up stuff later on YouTube, but Rumble is the platform for his weekly program. And he starts off his program by saying, welcome to Rumble, the free speech alternative to YouTube. That's a private company and they're making a profit, and God bless them. But it's a form of populism. It's the market saying YouTube's going to be censorious. They're even going to take directives from the government. Well, we're not going to be that. We're going to offer a market where you can actually have free speech and have people like Glenn Greenwald. And here you go. And it's successful and it's growing. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. That's the kind of things we need to see. The market will meet the challenges of this, corporatist government, private company alliance regime that just wants to censor the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And God bless the free market, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amusing to me that people who act like the free market is a bad thing, but are using, they're very picky about what laptop they have. They've got their Apple laptop. They've got their iPhones. Right. They're very, very particular about all this stuff. But the free market and capitalism are just awful.
Right. Show me, and I've said praising things about Bernie Sanders. I'm talking about populism, not his socialism, which I'm totally against. But tell the average Bernie Sanders fan that thinks capitalism is terrible that they have to give up their iPhone and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because that's really what it boils down to. It's hilarious. It's a running gag to see these people who have anti-capitalist stickers on their their iMac.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I don't even try to argue with them. It's just funny. Like, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's I just point and laugh. But I think on that we're gonna wrap this one up. And I first
Okay.
thank you so much for joining me today because I did not get socialist TikToks for us to look at and tell to get off our lawn.
Well, I appreciate it, Tom. I've enjoyed the conversation today. And anytime regular folks like you and I and others can talk about free speech and its importance, I've been an anti-war conservative or anti-war libertarian for most of my adult life, and that's still a top issue for me. But free speech is right there with it at this point. I can't fathom being the age I am, the closeness in age we are, and seeing what we're seeing right now, just a total lack of care or respect for just free speech and it being under threat and just people not caring and thinking it's not a big deal. I don't understand it. I'm an American man of a certain age who was always taught that that was one of the most important liberties we had. And no, I'm not going to be nonchalant about it.
Yeah. Well, I am gonna before I wrap up, I'm gonna point out that when we were coming up, we had always heard that yeah, the Democrats were very anti-black back in the day, but the party switched.
Right.
And that was always critiqued like, yeah,
Sure.
they just decided to swap positions all of a sudden. But we really look at the issue like free speech, and suddenly it doesn't sound nearly as implausible as it once did. Because
No, it doesn't.
we've kind of seen that in real time.
The Democratic president of the United States right now thought it might be proper to institute a disinformation governance board, a
Yes.
federal agency that would police citizen speech. In any other era, they might have wanted to do that, but they knew better that that's impossible because we do have a First Amendment. That's where we are.
The closest anyone got to that was McCarthyism.
Exactly. Exactly.
That was as close, and that was rightfully compared to the Salem witch trials.
Right. And eventually there were forces in Congress that pushed back to against it and shut it down. I don't see any such forces. Well, I do on the Republican side, Rand Paul and some others, but there's not as much as there should be.
No, no, and that's terrifying,
Yes.
especially in our line of work.
Yeah, there's none on the Democratic side. The Progressive Caucus doesn't care. They think this censoring everybody's great. So
Yeah. So on that happy note, I'm gonna wrap it up. Jack, thank you for joining me.
great to be with you, Tom. Enjoyed it. Look forward to do it again.
Yep. All right, folks. Thank you for sticking around. If you have a comment, please put them down below because it helps the algorithm. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit that notification bell, all the rigmarole that every other YouTube person tells you to do. And with that, we are going to call it a day. And I will see you all next week.